1945. Britain ruled 700 million people. 1965. Britain ruled 5 million. 20 years. 700 million people. Gone. But here's what almost nobody understands. Britain didn't lose its empire. It gave it away. Between 1945 and 1965, Britain granted independence to colony after colony. India, Pakistan, Burma, Ceylon, Malaya, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanganyika, Zambia, dozens more. While France fought brutal wars in Algeria and Indochina to keep its colonies, while Portugal spent decades fighting in Angola and Mozambique, Britain generally adopted a policy of peaceful disengagement. Why? The conventional answer is simple. Britain was exhausted after World War II, bankrupt, unable to hold the empire together, forced to retreat by nationalist movements. But that's not the whole truth. Because if Britain truly couldn't hold its empire, why did it fight brutal counterinsurgency wars in Malaya, Kenya, Cyprus, and Aden? Why did it deploy hundreds of thousands of troops? Why torture, concentration camps, systematic violence? If Britain was too weak to hold the empire, why did it spend a fortune trying to keep parts of it? The answer reveals something uncomfortable. Britain gave away its empire not because it had to, but
Winners and losers. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay. The USS Missouri. Japanese officials signed the surrender documents. World War II ended. Britain had won. At the end of the Second World War, Britain still controlled the largest empire in world history. The British Empire was at its territorial peak, larger than ever before. Victory celebrations filled London streets. Churchill declared triumph. Britain sat at the top table alongside the United States and the Soviet Union. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The war drained Britain's finances and significantly lowered its prestige in the colonies. Consider the costs. Britain entered World War II as the world's largest creditor nation. It emerged as the world's largest debtor. External debt, £3.4 billion, equivalent to over 100% of GDP. A quarter of Britain's national wealth destroyed or depleted during the war. Exports had fallen to 1/3 of pre-war levels. Industrial capacity damaged. Merchant fleet decimated. Britain was effectively bankrupt. The Asian catastrophe. But financial costs were only part of the story. Something else had broken. Something less quantifiable, but equally important. British prestige. 1942. Japanese forces swept through British colonies with shocking speed. Hong Kong fell in 18 days. Malaya and Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, fell in 70 days. Burma collapsed. British forces surrendered by the tens of thousands. The myth of British invincibility shattered. Colonial subjects who'd been told for generations.
August 15th, 1947. Midnight. Delhi. Jawaharlal Nehru stood in India's Constituent Assembly. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. The largest colony in human history became independent. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947, partitioning the subcontinent. 400 million people, nearly 60% of the empire's population, gone overnight. But here's what nobody tells you about Indian independence. It wasn't forced on Britain. Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy, was sent to India with instructions to grant independence. The date was originally set for June 1948. Mountbatten moved it forward to August 1947. Britain accelerated Indian independence. It didn't delay or resist. It rushed. Why? Because every month Britain stayed in India cost money it didn't have. Every month of occupation risked civil war that would be blamed on Britain. Better to leave quickly, blame the chaos on local leaders, and maintain influence through the Commonwealth. The domino effect. Once India fell, the rest followed. Ceylon, Sri Lanka, became independent in February 1948. The transfer of power was amicable, as leaders accepted Commonwealth membership and signed a defense agreement with Britain. Burma followed in January 1948, though Burma refused Commonwealth.
The myth of profitability. Here's the secret about the British Empire by 1945. Most colonies weren't profitable anymore. The days when India generated massive wealth for Britain, those were long past. By 1945, maintaining the Raj cost more than it returned. Billions of dollars worth of debt following World War II forced Britain to reevaluate the value and cost of its colonial possessions. The calculation was simple. Cost of direct rule, military occupation plus administration plus infrastructure. Benefits of direct rule, trade preferences, raw materials, strategic bases. By 1945, the costs exceeded the benefits. But, and this is crucial, Britain didn't need direct political control to maintain economic access. Neo-colonialism. Instead of governors and colonial administrators, Britain could install friendly, independent governments. Instead of direct rule, economic treaties. Instead of empire, the Commonwealth. Smith termed it neo-colonialism, continued economic domination of newly independent territories by their formal imperial overlords. Britain gave away political control, but maintained economic influence. Consider Ghana, gained independence in 1957 under Kwame Nkrumah, celebrated as a model of peaceful decolonization. But British companies still controlled Ghana's cocoa exports. British banks still dominated finance. British economic advisors still shaped policy. Ghana was independent, but Britain still extracted wealth. Same pattern across former colonies. Political independence, economic dependence. The sterling area. Even after independence, most former colonies remained in the sterling area, a currency zone tied to the British pound. The propaganda lie. Britain tells a comforting story about decolonization. Peaceful, orderly, voluntary. Unlike the French in Algeria or the Portuguese in Angola, Britain left gracefully. This is propaganda. While other European powers, such as France and Portugal, waged costly and unsuccessful wars to keep their empires intact, Britain generally adopted a policy of peaceful disengagement, except when it didn't. Malaya, 12 years of war, 1948 to 1960. The Malayan Emergency. Britain fought a brutal counterinsurgency campaign. 500,000 people forcibly relocated into concentration camps. Villages burned. Systematic torture. 24 civilians executed at Batang Kali in December 1948. Britain won, militarily, then granted Malaya independence in 1957. So why fight for 12 years if you were planning to leave anyway? Because Britain wanted to ensure Malaya's independence government would be pro-British, anti-communist, and economically compliant. Mission accomplished. Independent Malaya remained in Britain's economic sphere. Kenya, the hidden genocide. 1952 to 1960, the Mau Mau emergency. An estimated 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured, or maimed. About 160,000 were detained in appalling conditions. British concentration camps where children starved. Systematic torture, including castration and sexual assault. All to protect white settler interests and suppress demands for independence. Britain eventually granted Kenya independence in 1963, but only after crushing the Mau Mau movement and ensuring the incoming government would protect white settler land rights. Cyprus and Aden. Cyprus, 1955 to 1959. Torture techniques widely used against nationalists. Methods that would later appear in Northern Ireland. Aden, 1963 to 1967. The illusion of loss. So, did Britain lose its empire? No. Britain transformed it. Direct political control became economic influence. Governors became friendly governments. Empire became Commonwealth. The British Empire was transformed into the Commonwealth, in which numerous states gained independence but voluntarily associated with Great Britain. Voluntarily. That's the key word. Newly independent nations chose to remain in Britain's orbit because Britain had structured their economies to depend on London. What Britain actually gave away? Britain gave away the costs of administration, the burden of military occupation, the political liability of direct colonialism, the international condemnation. Britain kept trade relationships, resource access, financial ties, strategic influence. This wasn't defeat, it was restructuring. Why this matters? The story of British decolonization teaches us something important about power. Losing political control doesn't mean losing power. Sometimes indirect influence is more effective and cheaper than direct rule. Modern China doesn't need to colonize African nations. It offers loans, builds infrastructure, creates dependency. The United States doesn't need colonies. It has military bases, economic treaties, dollar hegemony. Russia doesn't annex former Soviet republics, except when it does. It installs puppet governments, controls energy supplies, maintains spheres of influence. Britain pioneered this model. Transform empire into informal influence. Give away the expensive parts, keep the profitable parts. The uncomfortable truth. Britain tells itself it voluntarily decolonized, that it granted independence out of democratic principles and moral evolution. The truth is colder. Britain gave away what was no longer profitable to hold directly. Where colonies were valuable, Britain fought brutal wars to keep them, until the costs exceeded the benefits. Where colonies were more trouble than they were worth, Britain left quickly and claimed credit for granting independence. This wasn't morality, it was accounting.